Hello, everybody. It's me, Fee, or Fiona Timms, otherwise known as White Zulu, author of my autobiography of the same name. And I welcome you all to another chapter of my book. I do hope you're all enjoying my life story, and I must thank all of you for being such dedicated subscribers, especially those who have written such complimentary comments below my videos. They are much appreciated. I would like to point out that the previous South African flag hanging on the wall behind me is not a political statement. It is simply a piece of history in the background of my first 50 years of my life, being born and growing up in my beloved mother country, South Africa. My autobiography, White Zulu, is not a political commentary, and frankly describes my experiences of growing up with the Zulu tribe as my family. That flag is simply a piece of cloth signifying the history of South Africa. It was originally used by the Union of South Africa from 1928 to 1961, and later the Republic of South Africa until 1994. I do enjoy your comments you put underneath my recordings. I really do appreciate them. Anyhow, this bit, we left off when I'd had that lovely young girl to afternoon tea, and I was expecting this to become a regular and very pleasant interlude in my very isolated life. However, Zulu Mists 1971 Part 4. That evening I was lying on our bed reading, and Fred came up to the bedroom to dress for dinner as usual. I still couldn't get used to this getting dark at 3 o'clock in the afternoon's business. And anyway, in South Africa, the mindset was, once it's dark, we get ready for bed. The Zulus call it going to bed with the fowls, and also, like the morning sickness, a great sleepiness came over me in the early evenings these days. Mummy wants to see you right away. Now. It sounds ominous. What have you done? You're kidding. You serious? She's waiting for you in her bedroom. With the same dread that I experienced so many times when our head mistress had sent for me at St. Anne's boarding school. I walked down the corridor through the length of the house to Bar and Bob's bedroom in the big turret in the north wing of the house. This is ridiculous, I said to myself. What am I afraid of? I'm not a schoolgirl. I'm carrying their first grandchild, for heaven's sake. But my heart was racing, nevertheless. Bar was sitting at her dressing table, fully dressed in her long tartan outfit, the remainders of a glass of whiskey at her elbow, and the inevitable cigarette between her fingers. I assumed Bob was in the ensuite bathroom from the sound of running water and splashing in there. I heard you had a visitor. Johnny tells me that there was a local girl with you this afternoon. She took a long pull on her cigarette and blew the smoke out through her nostrils like a dragon. You cannot go about inviting people here. It's not your house. You are not to do it again. She stabbed what was left of her cigarette viciously on top of the pile of ash and stubs in the overflowing ashtray on her dressing table. I was speechless. My first reaction after disbelief was outrage. Why had Johnny snitched, the little weasel? I hadn't seen him at all that afternoon, but he must have been watching me. I felt betrayed and then angry. Whenever I came across him, he was so friendly, making a cheerful comment, usually about the weather. I had no answer, though, and stood there mutinously. At that moment, Bob came out of the bathroom, wearing a toweling dressing gown, a glass full of neat whiskey and ice tinkling in his hand. He walked over to Bar and stood at her shoulder. He took a gulp from his glass and stared at me. It was apparent that they were a team. In spite of their constant bickering and putting each other down, I could plainly see that they ganged up on outsiders. I turned and walked out, fuming, seething with rage, and racing through my head were all the riposts I should have made. What I really wanted to do was go back and give Bar a snot clap. That wonderful onomatopoeic word the Afrikaners use for a smack on the head, after which you have to wipe the mucus off your hand. By the time I reached our bedroom, I was furious, and I told Fred what had happened. He was terribly distressed and sympathetic. Just ignore them. Don't provoke them. It only makes them worse, he pleaded. This wasn't what I wanted to hear, nor did I want to go down to dinner and sit with Bar and Bob. Come on, we'll be late. Fred was dressed and looking sublimely handsome. You didn't even speak to them, but you have to eat something. It's not good for you or our baby to skip meals. So down I went, for his sake alone. All three, Weenie too, were in the sitting room knocking back cocktails. On top of all that bath time whiskey, I thought, this can't be good. But they behaved as though nothing had happened. Darling, croaked Bar with joy as Fred walked in after me. She patently adored her oldest son and was always so pleased to see him, however little time had passed by. She made the occasional darling to me sound so false, or so I felt. There was certainly none of the warmth she showed Fred. I often wondered whether she called me darling because she couldn't bring herself to use my name. Christmas at Glencruitten. I'd never considered myself a victim, far from it. 20 years of conditioning by my parents ensured that, instead of standing up to them, incurring further wrath, I tended to slip off to join my true family, the Zulus, with whom I had identified far more closely. Generally, after what I considered particularly unfair treatment by Mum or Dad, I saddled up my horse and roamed to the far boundaries of the farm, seething inside, fuming at their stupidity, only eventually to be seduced by the sheer beauty of my surroundings. It was therapeutic to pull up from a long gallop, walk Merlin down the slope of a field to where there was a small dam hidden in the dip, where every spring the male spotted-back weaver birds, using just their beaks, firmly knitted tight green basket nests onto the tips of wattle branches which dangled like bare wands over the water. They would carefully strip off all the leaves from the end twigs first, so that egg-eating snakes couldn't climb up and slither along to rob their nests. And there the male weavers hung, swinging from their newly woven nests by their claws, fluttering their bright yellow wings, swizzling and chattering noisily, trying to entice the females to settle into their nests and start laying eggs. Ginger-faced Cape weavers nested there too, setting up competition with the others for prime places to raise their own chicks. The tree that overhung the water was alive with weavers. Their shrill, chattering cacophony didn't seem to bother the pair of dab chicks who raised a couple of fluffy, orange-tufted chicks in the reeds every year. The parents swam busily about, carving a V of ripples on the water's surface as they duck-dived for morsels of green weed to feed to their young. Red bishop birds, pitch black except for their bright scarlet heads, wove their round ball-like nests between tall trees near the bank, and golden bishops, as black as the red bishops except their heads were a searingly bright gold, raised their chicks in tightly woven basket nests in other reeds further away next to the dam wall. Years later, I discovered that finding both types of bishop bird nesting in the same area, let alone the same little dam, was most unusual. On the very hottest days during Christmas school holidays, after a long gallop up the grassy slope to the dam, I would take my horse's saddle off and leave it on the bank, numbness side up, to dry, while I swung myself up onto his hot, sweating back, like Injuns do in old John Wayne movies. I was an agile, fit, and skinny kid, so it was an effortless maneuver. Onto his hot, sweating back and rode him into the dam. He enjoyed the water as much as I did, and splashed his muzzle about, flicking sparkling droplets into the air as I dangled my bare feet in the refreshingly cool water. Later, I would swing by the huts after releasing Merlin to roll about in the dust and join whoever was at home, in the way of women, preparing midday meals for their menfolk to return to when the farm bell rang at 1, summoning everyone to a 2-hour break. They were always ready to pour me a cup of strong coffee from the blackened kettle hanging from a tripod over the open fire, and offer me a handful of uputu to squeeze into a sausage shape and sherba, which means dunk, into the coffee. It was different here at Glencruitten. I was in an insidious position. I couldn't gravitate towards the staff. Rather than my foster parents and lifelong friends as my Zulus had been, these were strangers, keeping me at a chilly arm's length, and no matter how outwardly polite they seemed, I had the feeling they'd picked up on Bar and Bob's cue and wanted nothing to do with, or at best felt they had to avoid, being seen to have any contact with me. I couldn't trust them to keep any confidence either, after Johnny, whether inadvertently or not, I wasn't sure, had got me into such trouble after Mariota's visit. It was quite clear where his loyalties lay, and I wasn't sure about Stella either. She always seemed so nervous when we came across one another in the castle, and, after a brief greeting, hurried away to get on with her enormous task of keeping the place clean, with the help of 2 crofters' wives who came in to clean on a daily basis. My world shrank rapidly, telescoped down to just a couple of rooms in the huge place. The only territory where I felt remotely comfortable was our bedroom, where I spent endless hours reading books I found in the library, which was also a chapel, a short walk down the corridor, or dozing off to jerk awake in the pitch dark, groggy from bizarre dreams, wondering what country I was in, only to realize that it was mid-afternoon and Scottish Highland nightfall had taken me unawares yet again. I found another refuge in the small sitting room at the base of the south tower. There was always a log fire burning in the grate, although nobody came in until just after Saturday for lunchtime drinks. Weenie was out on her daily walks, Bar and Fred somewhere on the estate, and Bob tinkering with machineries either in the pump at the small loch or in one of the garages. I took a book in there and curled up in a big chintz-covered armchair at a tall window. I had the place to myself for the morning and spent the time reading or gazing out of the window at the mist-enshrouded glen. The steep terraced garden appeared a contrast of different shades of wintry greys and browns, like an old-fashioned sepia photograph. All the lawns were manicured to look like carpets. Grey stone terraces and paler gravel paths glistened in the wet. Every shrub was clipped, trimmed into various conical or round shapes and outlines, and consisted of evergreens like conifers or holly. Right down at the bottom of the glen, frosted reeds and bulrushes stood sentinel around the frozen Japanese reflecting pool. Huge tall pine and fir trees grew up the slope beyond the pool, right up and onto the ridge, where they looked almost black against a sombre and threatening sky. They seemed to crowd on in, droplets dripping off their needles in the steady drizzle, to disappear now and again as an Arctic wind swept swirls of foggy vapour through the valley, blotting out the landscape and flinging a spatter of raindrops against the wet glass of the window pane. Nothing stirred out there, no birds, no insects, not even a leaf fluttered in the chilly breeze. Exactly like Mackay had done on the farm at midday every day, Jimmy brought a tray containing a crystal jug of cold water, ice cubes clinking in a silver bucket, and a silver salver of sliced lemon, all the requisites for gin and martinis, into the sitting room and placed it on the sideboard. The difference was, when I looked up from my book, he barely glanced at me, refusing to catch my eye before he hurried back into the kitchen. Conversely, Mackay loved to pause for a chat, and if he found me on my own, putting the tray down, he pushed his little white cap, like a fez, a bit further back on his greying peppercorn curls, ran a sleeve over his perspiring brown forehead, and tilted his head on one side to look at me. "Nkosazana, did you see the baboons this morning?" he'd ask, conversationally in Zulu. "They were down in the paddock there," and he pointed out towards the river. "I saw them pulling up and eating the new ryegrass shoots planted for the cattle." He paused and started to cackle, shaking his head ruefully. "Then your mother saw them, and she shouted for the dogs to chase them. Those dogs!" By now he had both hands on his bent knees. He was laughing so much. "They were barking, and they ran down and chased the baboons off, fast, right into the bush." He was gasping for breath between gales of laughter as he demonstrated the scene with both hands. His left depicting baboons running along by galloping his black fingers, chased by his right hand paddling the air to represent our dogs in pursuit, all accompanied by the caterwauling noise he made in his expert mimicry of terrified, shrieking baboons. "Even your dog Pitts, that small dog, he was out in front chasing those baboons. Mackay would stand for a moment, shaking his head and clicking his tongue in admiration. None of our farm staff ever got over the discrepancy between the size of Pitts and his capacity for bravery, or more to the point, recklessness. Mackay would put his hands down again and, still chuckling with mirth, make his way slowly and rather reluctantly back to the kitchen. I loved these interludes. I got as much pleasure out of the baboons' antics as the Zulus did, especially Mackay, and always enjoyed his imitation of their behavior, copied from his years of covertly watching them when he was outside doing chores like fetching firewood. I felt trapped at Glencruitten, and there appeared to be no escape. I longed to get out of there. That is all for the time being, and there's more to come next week. I would like to thank John Moslane for putting aside his Friday afternoons to help me produce these videos. Without him, I could not do this. I would also like to thank Sean van Vuren for his sterling work in uploading my videos to my YouTube channel, adding the photos, as well as managing my channel so professionally. If you would like to know more about my other works, I have written 5 books in all, and each one is autobiographical. Please visit my website at www.whitezulubook.com, where you will find a lot more information as well as plenty of photographs. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my life story, and there is plenty more to come. A thumbnail photo will be attached each week, and thank you so much for all your support and all the very kind remarks you make in complimenting me on my work. I really appreciate it. Goodbye.